With the 2024 NFL Draft fully in the rearview mirror, it's time for our first 2024 Buffalo Bills 53-man roster projection today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Well, folks, welcome in. The major pillars of the offseason are behind us. The NFL Draft, the big waves of free agency. And so now I want to take this opportunity to assess this roster and project which 53 players will make the team when it's all said and done. Now, obviously, there's probably some more moves to come. We need to see the undrafted free agent class finalized. There's still room for other players to be added, in particular after June 1st when the cap savings for Trey White hits. So there could be some more moves. But we have enough at this point to take a reasonable look at this roster and try to figure out who's going to make this team. And I'll tell you what, in doing this, it was quite revealing because I think there are some legit position battles on this team. And so part of my objective today is to highlight those and, of course, talk about who's going to make this football team when it's all said and done. So let's dive into it. We're going to do offense in the first segment, defense in the next segment. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know what you think. If there's a particular position group that maybe you see it sorting out differently, let me know and tell me why. I love for these conversations to be two ways. All right, let's get into it. First position, quarterback. This is pretty simple to me. I think the Bills will roster two quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Mitchell Trubisky. The only other quarterback on the roster right now is Shane Buechele. I think he'll be back on the practice squad. That one's easy. Running back, I find to be fairly easy as well. I think they will keep four, including fullback Reggie Gilliam, and then James Cook is the lead back, Ty Johnson as the veteran in the room, and Ray Davis, the Bills' fourth-round draft pick out of Kentucky. I think those skill sets complement each other quite well, where you have your true lead back in James Cook, who can catch the football and has a lot of agility and elusiveness in how he carries the football. Ty Johnson is a nice blend of size, speed, and power, can run outside, is pretty physical between the tackles. And then, of course, Ray Davis, who's your bowling ball, right? Your battering ram, your guy that can also catch the football, your rookie addition to this team. So I really like the makeup of that top three. I do have Darrington Evans as being cut, and I'm not going to mention a lot of undrafted free agents because none of that is final, and you see two or three guys flip every single day. But it certainly appears that Frank Gore Jr. is going to be part of the mix for the Bills, and there's a lot of hype there, which is understandable. He's the son of Frank Gore, who's, third all-time in the history of the NFL in rushing, and certainly Frank Gore put out a spirited social media post about Frank Gore and his belief in Brandon Beane, to be honest, and all that. So I certainly see the opportunity that exists for Frank Gore. He'll have a great chance to showcase himself this preseason and in training camp, but I do think he's going to need help to make the roster. I don't think the Bills are going to keep 5 running backs. I think they're going to keep 4, including Gilliam. And so barring an injury from Cook, Davis, or Johnson, I don't know that there's a really good path for Gore to make this team. At wide receiver, folks, this was hard to sort out. And what's interesting is originally I went through and I made my projections and I had an extra spot, which never happens. Normally I'm at 54, 55 players and I have to trim one or two. I was at 52 players and then I had to decide who I wanted to add back. And where I actually landed was adding an additional wide receiver. I originally went through this and had 5 receivers making the team. And I went back through and I got to 6 as kind of the spot where I went a little bit heavy. And I think part of that is just because you have so much compelling depth for the last 2 spots. And it was tough to sort out. So let me know what you think here. But this is how I have it as of now. The easy part is the top 4. Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Mac Hollins. I think that is very straightforward top 4. It's the next 2 where it gets hard. And you got a bunch of reasonable options here. The 2 that I settled on were Andy Isabella and Tyrell Shavers. And very close in terms of missing Justin Shorter, Chase Claypool, KJ Hamler, and Quintez Cephas. I thought all 4 of those guys had a reasonable path to making the team. And then, of course, Brian Thompson was kind of the long shot. Now, the reason that I went with Andy Isabella and Tyrell Shavers is, first of all, Isabella was a player that was around last year, and so was Shavers. And it felt like Isabella, I mean, he got a couple opportunities to get called off the practice squad. He gives them an element of speed, right? I think that that's something that is important. And then Tyrell Shavers is a player that, of course, was an undrafted free agent last year that spent the year on the practice squad, that flashed in the preseason. But his special teams background in college is very robust. I mean, I think he had 3 blocked punts at San Diego State, had another scoop and score on special teams at Alabama. He's a guy that's very interesting to me. And you heard Brandon Beane openly speak about how hard he's working and how he's been at the facility all offseason long. He's certainly doing his best to showcase himself and show the team that he's going to work and try to earn everything that he can get. So I have him just as the guy that I think brings the highest upside on special teams with how important that's going to be. And remember, the Bills don't have some of their key guys in the special teams department that they've had over the years, and Saron Neal and Tyler Medikevich. Those guys aren't back. And I think they're looking for some new core special teamers, and I think Tyrell Shavers could be that for this team. And so he really intrigues me. I think Justin Shorter has a case as a draft pick. I think he's probably the most rigid of all the receivers in terms of developing and being ready to go, but it certainly feels like he's working hard. Chase Claypool obviously has the most upside. I mean, the guy's had some really productive seasons in the NFL. He's still young and huge and athletic. KJ Hamler has a speed dynamic. Quintez Cephas might be the guy that I think plays the receiver position the best out of all these guys that are in competition here. So it's a fascinating wide receiver mix, especially when it comes to the depth. And sorting that out is going to be challenging, but I went with Isabella for the speed, and it felt like he just kind of had a little bit of chemistry going last year. And then Tyrell Shavers for the special teams upside. But if you think Shorter, Claypool, Hamler, or Cephas could be one of those 2, I agree with you. This is just where I'm landing for now. At tight end, I find this to be a pretty straightforward conversation. Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Quentin Morris as your 3 that makes it. And you have a couple of very attractive practice squad guys in Trey McKitty and Zach Davidson. Trey McKitty, a recent 3rd-round pick. I think he's a roster-worthy tight end 3 in the NFL. And Zach Davidson as a very athletic, versatile guy that's young, was a recent 5th-round pick and was injured last year. And so I think your tight end room is really outstanding. But I do think Kincaid, Knox, and Morris have the upper hand. Then we get to the offensive line where there's some really good competition as well for those last few spots. I think your locks are Deion Dawkins, David Edwards, Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, Spencer Brown. And then you got to sort out the depth. I think 4 depth players will make it. I think 9 offensive linemen ultimately make this roster. And so the 4 backups that I landed on were Ryan Vandemark and Alec Anderson as returning players from last year that are on a good trajectory. Practice squad 2 years ago, make the active roster last year. And then the other 2, Cedric Van Pran Granger as a draft pick who I think has starter appeal, whether that's this year or next year. I think there's a path for that to happen just based on who I believe Cedric Van Pran Granger is as a prospect and as a player. And then I'm going to go with Lyle Collins as the guy that brings position flexibility that they believe can play tackle and guard, that has a pedigree in the NFL. I think obviously health is the concern there, but in a backup role, maybe you feel pretty good about what he can bring to your football team. So that means I have some players that were tough to cut, including Will Clapp, who's a veteran experienced center. But I think in Alec Anderson and Cedric Van Pran Granger, you have two players that can snap the football and I think just have higher ceilings, especially Van Pran Granger. Alec Anderson can play all 5 spots. I think that's going to really help him above a guy like Will Clapp. Then you have Kevin Jarvis, Tommy Doyle, Richard Garage, Travis Clayton as a draft pick, Tylen Grable as a draft pick. I think they have both of those guys are going to need some help. Grable as the late round pick out of UCF. I watched his tape. You can see the length, you can see the movement skills. I just don't think he has much gravitational pull. And what I mean by that is he doesn't stay latched on blocks very consistently. And so I think he's very project-y, which is expected as a guy who played quarterback in high school and then switched to tight end in college and then switched to offensive line in college. It's going to take some time, but I don't think you can roster him right now. I actually think Richard Garage is probably ahead of him based on, the exposures I've had to both of them as players. I feel like Garage just offers more, even though he's not close to the caliber of athlete. And then Tommy Doyle, I mean, he's made this team before, but 2 years in a row in ACL tear, it just doesn't feel like he's on a good path. I mean, it might actually be a good thing for him to spend a year on the practice squad. And then, he can see what opportunities await him in year 5 of his career. So on the outside looking in, Will Clapp, Kevin Jarvis, Tommy Doyle, Richard Garage, Travis Clayton, Tylen Grable. Of course, Grable, the International Pathway Program player that I anticipate will be the 17th player on the practice squad. So 9 offensive linemen. So when it comes to offense, we have 2 quarterbacks, 4 wide receivers. 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 3 tight ends, 9 offensive linemen. Keeping in mind, they only kept 5 receivers last year. And so I have them going heavy at wide receiver. All right, we're going to get to the defensive side of the football in just a moment, so be sure to stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a huge win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You've already talked about that, but there is just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. And the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, like unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, folks, let's focus on the defensive side of the football here. At defensive end, I have them keeping 5, and this was kind of challenging to sort out that 5th spot. But Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, A.J. Epinesa, I think are your clear 3 that are going to make this roster. And then I do have Dwayne Smoot, the Bills' newest addition at defensive end. They signed him end of last week. We did a podcast on that on Friday. I've been a big fan of Dwayne Smoot for a while. I think he can elevate what Shaq Lawson has given you as a quality run defender with more pass rush juice. I think he's had really 5 good seasons in the NFL rushing the passer. Last year, not his best, coming off of an Achilles injury for 2022, but he's 29 years old. He's 2 years removed now from that injury, and I just really like his game. I think he'll provide such a nice floor as a depth player that you're going to feel comfortable with rostering. And then from there, I have Javon Solomon, and I have Javon Solomon beating out Casey Toohill, Kingsley Jonathan, and Cameron Klein. Javon Solomon, I think what really helps his case is he is a cost control player on a rookie deal, a day 3 pick, that I think gives them appeal as a designated pass rusher, that gives them a little something different with how they can attack the pocket with. He's got good length. He's got good flexibility, good pass rush variety, and he's got youth on his side. And I think he can beat out Casey Toohill. And Toohill's a guy, I studied his tape. I wasn't enamored with it. I thought he was really a high-effort player, a try-hard guy, but I didn't love the way that he beat blocks. I didn't love his power. I didn't love his pass rush repertoire. I think he's a bottom of the depth chart type player that brings some motor and urgency, but I just feel like there's more that appeals to me in Javon Solomon than Casey Toohill. So I think he'll be back potentially on the practice squad if there's not an NFL opportunity out there for him. But I felt like the more appealing player to roster to me was Javon Solomon. And then, of course, Kingsley Jonathan, who's been around, and I think he's got a lot of athleticism. But the fact that he was barely an impact player at Syracuse, and then like his last season, he didn't even start there. I don't know. I think if Kingsley Jonathan was going to be a thing, he'd be a thing by now. And so I know that he has athleticism. I know that he could play some special teams, and that matters. I think he's in the mix. I think one of Solomon, Toohill, and Jonathan can make this roster. It's just a matter of sorting out who. And right now, the tiebreaker for me is the draft pick. That gets us to defensive tackle. Have the Bills keeping 5 of those. At Oliver, Daquan Jones, Deshaun Williams, Austin Johnson, and Dewayne Carter. Eli Anku right now is the only one not making the team. He's been a long stay on the practice squad. I think Oliver, Jones, and Johnson are pretty straightforward. I think Dewayne Carter as a 3rd-round pick is pretty straightforward. Maybe the surprise for some is Deshaun Williams making this team. I think people are sleeping on Deshaun Williams. This guy started 44 games over the last 4 seasons. He's got pretty good tape. And he's a guy that has a lot of athleticism and has not really had a chance to showcase that playing as kind of a 2-gapper, as a 4-eye and 5 technique for a gyro, Avero in Denver and Carolina. I think he's going to get a chance to play more in the B gaps, and that's going to help him a lot be more effective. And I think that he's going to have a hard time, or the Bills are going to have a hard time not keeping him around. I think some people kind of are overlooking this addition, but I think there's a good chance that he makes this roster and gets some playing time as well. He's done that really pretty consistently over the last 4 years of his career. So I think the Bills are roster 5, Oliver, Jones, Williams, Johnson, and Carter. At linebacker, this is an interesting situation as well. I think the Bills are roster 6, and they only have 7 right now on the roster, not including unofficial, undrafted free agent signings. And so for as much as people might be reading into, maybe something being wrong with Matt Milano, which I totally understand that thought process, you needed numbers here in a bad way. And again, your linebacker depth last season was stressed tremendously. I mean, A.J. Klein out of retirement to start against the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. I mean, that's where it got to. You had to play Tyrell Dotson with one arm. You didn't have Milano or Bernard at the end of the season. Like, I totally understand why Brandon Beane is loading up on linebacker depth, but also they literally had to get some numbers here. So I have them keeping 6, Matt Milano, Terrel Bernard, Nicholas Moreau, Dorian Williams, Edifwan Ulafosio. And then it really comes down to Balin Spector versus Deion Jones. And it's hard for me because Balin Spector has been a little bit flashy, but also the guy gets injured and he doesn't even play. I mean, he's just, for a guy that doesn't even get on the field to be as injured as often as he is, pretty concerning. However, I do like his tape at Clemson. I do like his size and athleticism. I think it says something that he got chances to play over Dorian Williams last year. So I think that gives him a lot of advantages. I just need this guy to stay on the field. And so I do have him making it over Deion Jones. Deion Jones is a player that feels like the Traven Howard signing last year, kind of later in the process, depth at linebacker, experience, but probably his best football is well behind him. I think Deion Jones, obviously, for 5 or 6 years was one of the better linebackers in the game, but that shoulder injury has really taken something from him. Now he's only 29, so it's not like it's game over for him, and I think he's got a chance, but it feels like this team has a little soft spot for Balen Spector, and so hopefully he can stay healthy and at least be an asset on special teams. So the 6 linebackers, Milano Bernard, Nicholas Moreau, Dorian Williams, Edifwan Ulofoshio, and Balen Spector. At corner, the Bills, I think, will keep 6 of those. Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas, Kyer Elam as your CB3, and then Jamarcus Ingram is CB4. I mean, the path is wide open. The only guy he's got to beat out right now is Kyron Brown. So I feel really good about Jamarcus Ingram in his path to this roster. He's on that trajectory that we've seen from so many other guys, whether it's Ryan Vandemark or Alec Anderson or Quentin Morris. We've seen this happen too, where they stick around and eventually they make the team. Ike Bucker's done this. So I think Jamarcus Ingram has a pretty clear path to making this roster right now with CB4. And then in the slot, of course, Taron Johnson and then Daquan Hardy, the Bills' 6th-round pick out of Penn State to provide depth in the slot, and then really exciting punt return upside as well. Kyron Brown, your only unofficial UDFA signing that doesn't make this roster at corner. Then at safety, I think the Bills will keep 4 of those. Taylor Rapp, Mike Edwards, Cole Bishop, and then Cam Lewis, who they just signed to a 2-year extension. That does put Damar Hamlin and Kendall Williamson on the outside looking in. I think Damar Hamlin's, it felt like he was on a good path, and unfortunately the injury, and then he makes the team, and it felt like he made the team, but not really. He was inactive most weeks. I think Cam Lewis is clearly ahead of him, and I think Rapp, Edwards, and Bishop are clearly ahead of him. So unless they keep 5 safeties, which I don't know that they will, I don't know if there's a path for Damar Hamlin, barring an injury, to one of those guys above him. And then in terms of specialists, Reed Ferguson, your long snapper, Tyler Bass, your kicker, Sam Martin, your punter, and then Matt Hawk being cut. I'll get to herd mentality this week. I had a question about Tyler Bass, and somebody said, "Look, we're not talking enough about this." Well, yeah, I mean, everybody knows he struggled last year, but they signed him to an extension, and they're pretty committed to Tyler Bass as the kicker. I don't think there's an upgrade coming. I don't think they're going to do anything. I think they believe in Tyler Bass, and he's got to get it going. Are we concerned about it? Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think there's a path to him not being the kicker, barring an injury. So, yeah, he's got to make the Bills right on that extension. And the extension felt fine at the time, but it didn't feel fine as 2024 moved along, or 2023 moved along. He's got to get it going. But I don't think there's a world where, barring any just catastrophic shows up at workouts and camp and just can't kick the ball, I think he's going to have a chance to be the Bills kicker this year. That doesn't mean we're not concerned about it. We're absolutely concerned about it. But you're pretty locked in right now based on that extension. There you have it. My 53-man roster projection. It got a little bit tight there at defensive end. It got tough. Linebacker, it got tough. Wide receiver, it was super tough. Offensive line was challenging to sort out. So you got some really nice competition here for the bottom of this roster, and it should make for some fun offseason conversations as we get to OTAs and, of course, camp and preseason. Sorting this out is going to be interesting, and there's still more players to add to this roster. But I thought this was a good time to take our first look at a 53-man roster projection. Got a lot to get to this week, as we do every week. We'll do a podcast on undrafted free agents at some point. We're expected to get the schedule released this week. That's not official yet, but based on the last 4 or 5 years of when it's come out, it feels like this Thursday is likely to be the schedule release, which, of course, we will break down and spend a lot of time focusing in on the schedule and how that lays out. Would like to do herd mentality this week. All kinds of good stuff, so don't miss anything. Make sure that you are subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.